Today we're going to read Chapter 8 of the Thanksgiving Treasure. We pedaled furiously and got to Rehnquist's farm in record time because we didn't want the food to get cold. We leaned our bikes against his front porch in just the right way so that we could make a quick getaway if necessary. We crept up into the porch, Carla May hanging back a bit and me trying to balance 2 bags of food. "There's no light," she hissed. "He's not here. Let's go." "He's probably sitting there in the dark." I kicked tentatively at the door and we waited. The porch swing creaked in the wind and we both spun around, half expecting to see him standing behind us with his shotgun. I kicked again, louder, and I heard some movement inside. Suddenly the door swung open and there he stood in his rumpled old clothes with a day's growth of scraggly whiskers. For a second there was an absolute silence as he stared at us, unbelieving, and we stared back at him, frightened to death. I was quick to notice that he didn't have his shotgun in his hand. Finally, I found my voice. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mr. Rehnquist," I said weakly. "Get out," he shouted. "Get off my porch." "But we brought you a Thanksgiving feast." Suddenly, he reached behind the door and he pulled out his shotgun. "Addie," I heard Carla May gasp from somewhere behind me. He leveled the gun at me. I was sure I could see all the way down inside the barrels and make out a couple of big red shells in there, but I was angry at him for being such a grouch and an ingrate, and nothing could stop me now. "Go on," I shouted. "Shoot me. I'm not afraid of you, you old misanthrope." "What?" he said. "The law is on my side. Law says people keep off my property." "I'm not hurting your darn old property." "Go on," he said. "Get out of here." I was about to lose the heavy bags, and he still had the gun leveled at me. "Hurry up and shoot me," I said defiantly, "because I'm about to drop your dinner." "What dinner?" he asked. "I brought you Thanksgiving feast. I knew you wouldn't make a turkey, so I brought some of ours." "And candied sweet potatoes," said Carla May meekly, "and cranberry sauce." "And 2 pieces of pie," I added. "1 pumpkin and 1 apple," said Carla May. "What are you bringing me dinner for?" he said, slowly lowering the gun and squinting suspiciously at us. "Because we're celebrating the spirit of Thanksgiving," I said, "the way the Pilgrims did with the Indians." "We're the Pilgrims and you're the Indian," said Carla May, idiotically still hiding behind me. I elbowed her to shut up. "Tell your folks I don't need no charity," he said irritably. "My folks?" I said. "Are you kidding? If my father knew I was here, he'd probably shoot me." "You're a mean old hermit who won't pay him." Who's your father?" "He dug out your pond." "You Jim Mills's kid?" he asked. I nodded. "And I had to steal this dinner practically out of my father's mouth, didn't I, Carla May?" She nodded. "Now that I've gone to all that trouble, the least you can do is eat it." For a second he seemed to be thinking it all over, and I took the opportunity to race past him right into the house. "Hey!" he shouted. "Come back here." Before he could figure out what to do, Carla May had run past him too, and we were both inside his dingy old kitchen dragging all the stuff out of the bags. I had tried to guess what his house would look like inside, but it was even worse than I had imagined. It looked as though it hadn't really been cleaned since his wife had died 15 years ago. There was an incredible clutter around the kitchen, dirty dishes, pots and pans, tools, and parts of farm machinery, old newspapers, beat-up jackets and sweaters thrown here and there, peeling wallpaper, sagging cabinets, and a rusty old pump in the sink. It was gloomy and scary, and later I realized it was sad to think of him living in that depressing place all alone. There was an old concerta on the table, and as I was about to pick it up and move it, he grabbed it away from me. "Hands off," he said. "Do you play that, Mr. Rehnquist?" I asked politely. "No," he said. "Why are you taking off your coat? I didn't ask you to stay." "We want to serve you dinner," I said, and we grabbed a plate and some silverware from the pile on the sink and started laying out the dinner at his rickety old table. "Dad blam kids," he growled, and I said, "Hands off. Go on. Get out of here." He put the gun down behind the door and came towards us. Carla May backed away from the table a bit, but I could see he was looking with some interest at all the food, even while he was yelling at us, so I kept dishing it out. I said, "Get your hands off my stuff," he said, looking at me fiercely. "This is all going to be cold if you don't sit down now and eat it," I said, using the same tone of voice my grandmother always used with me when I was late for supper. "Don't boss me," he said, sounding almost pouty. "I kept on putting the food in his plate. He squinted down at it. What's that yellow-looking stuff? He asked. Creamed onions, I said brightly. They're delicious. He tentatively poked a finger in the onions and licked it off. Yeah, he said, sounding annoyed. Well, I suppose I'll have to eat up this junk to get the table cleared off. He glared at us again and then sat down, trying to look as uninterested as possible. I knew we had him hooked. Better get yourself a napkin, I said. Don't have any napkins, he snapped. Not even paper? Nope, he said angrily. Well, I said, reaching for a dish towel, this will have to do. Hands off, he shouted. You're too bossy. I don't like bossy kids. I shrugged and I came back to the table, and Carla May and I sat down to watch him. He looked over at us defiantly, as though he wasn't going to eat while we were watching, so we wouldn't have the satisfaction of getting the best of him. There was a long silence while he glared at us, and we stared back. He squirmed in his chair and grunted and looked down at the food and up at us, and finally he angrily grabbed a fork and jammed it into a hunk of turkey and wolfed it down as though he hadn't eaten in days. He glared at us the whole time, and we tried to look pleasant. How is it, Mr. Rehnquist? I asked after he had eaten a few bites. Not bad, he said grudgingly. That's my grandmother's famous chestnut dressing. Not bad, he said again. There's not one store-bought thing in this dinner. I helped my grandmother make that cranberry sauce. I grated the orange rind in it. He looked at the jar and then stuck his finger right in and got a big glob and tasted it. Carla May and I gave each other a disgusted look. I had it before, he said. My wife used to make it. Does it taste like oranges? I asked. Yep. Your grandmother's almost as good at cranberry sauce as my wife was, he said. And then he reached into the sack to see if there was anything else and he found a lump of wax paper with a carrot and 2 sugar lumps in it. What's this? He asked. Oh, don't eat that, I said. That's for marble cake. Who? Your horse. What do you know about my horse? He asked, looking suspicious. We saw her. When was that? The other day, said Carla May without thinking. When we were here, I gave her a kick under the table. Rehnquist looked at us sharply. You the two I caught sneaking around here the other day? We had to sneak, I said. We were afraid of you. We're not afraid of you now, though, and I gave him a weak smile. You sure? He asked. Yeah, I said, and Carla May nodded in agreement. Well, don't be so sure, he said. I might shoot you yet if I catch you sneaking around here again. We have no intentions of sneaking now that we're friends, I said. We'll just come to your front door and knock. You stay away from my front door. Who says we're friends? Well, aren't we? I asked. We brought you this terrific dinner, didn't we? Why? He asked. Well, because. Because why? Tell him again, Addie, said Carla May. You know, about the spirit of Thanksgiving. I looked at him. I'm a pretty smart old gink, he said, so don't fool around with me, sister. Tell me the truth. Well, I told you, it's the spirit of Thanksgiving, and I was worried about your horse. You're worried about Treasure? He said, looking at me curiously. Treasure? I said. Is that her name? That's nifty. What are you worried about Treasure for? She's in awful condition, Mr. Rehnquist. She's too fat. Someone ought to exercise her. I used to ride her when I had cows up to the north pasture, he said. Now I don't have no cows, so she don't get rid. Well, I said, trying to sound nonchalant, someone ought to care for her. Did you know that some people who have horses that need exercising actually pay someone to ride them? Well, he said, squinting at me, did you know that some people who got horses actually get paid for letting people ride them? That sounds backwards to me, I said, but I'd be willing to exercise her for a fair trade in tadpoles and a couple of turtles out of your stream, and it seems to me that you'd be getting the better part of the deal if you want to know the truth. Not so fast there, he said. Turtles are worth money. They get as high as 10 cents for 'em down at the dime store. That's because they have paintings on their back, I answered quickly. Yours are just plain. Why don't you get that father of yours to buy my horse, he said. Then you can exercise her whenever you want. My father won't buy me a horse, I said. He won't even let me ride one. Your father won't let you ride a horse? He asked, giving me a sly look. Nope. Okay, he said. Okay, what? We got a deal, he said. You can exercise her if you don't come around the house bothering me none. Honest? I asked, not believing my ears. Yeah, he said. To make sure he was going to stick to it, I spit on my hand and I held it out for him to shake. Much to my surprise, he spit on his hand too and slapped it up against mine and shook. I drew back my hand all wet and sticky and tried not to make a face. Then Carla May and I got up, cleared the table, and gathered up the glass jars because I knew Grandma would miss them. As we went out the door, Rehnquist said it was the best dinner he had ate in some time. He didn't exactly thank us, but he decided that's what he had meant to say.